What's that crime stuff? Do you want
Alright, slow down, stop. Because if he stops, you guys are gonna get hit. Stop.
Tell your teacher not listening. Don't touch the traffic.
No, that was you. Stop lying. He's like, you don't have a picture.
Hi, mister.
Oh, you.
Hey! Hey! Nobody's smart.
It's video right now, but.
Walk that we just did. The purpose of this walk is to let know that to raise awareness against drugs and alcohol. Peter Mickens. Hello? Can you hear me? Isn't there? Perfect. Okay, thank you guys. We really appreciate you guys coming out to walk with us. I'm not sure if any of you guys know him. This is Rodney. He's going to be taking videos, pictures throughout the week. So from time to time he might show up here and take photos of you guys doing stuff like this, like what he's doing right now. Alright, so say hello.
This year was a big turnout. I think that's the biggest turnout we had from the years past. We need more health workers in our community.
Prevent illness, and that's what you're doing by doing the exercise that you're doing. So one is we're supporting the good habits of no alcohol, no drugs, but the other part is the exercise and the good eating. So if you, how many in this room would like to be a nurse or a doctor one day? Anybody? Hey, I like that.
I want to be sure that this group can hear you guys. 1, 2, I want to see their hair go back.
3.
So I was born in Red Lake, Ontario, to 2 alcoholic parents. There's 20 years difference between my mom and my dad. My dad is older and had a family previous to us. My mom was pretty young when she met with him. And my dad was a minor and we moved around a lot. My dad was a very violent alcoholic. And so I grew up in a home that was very much ruled by fear and intimidation. That was his main method of control for my mother and I. So I grew up learning that you don't talk about stuff, you don't feel things. The only one in the house that's allowed to really feel anything is dad. And if you do have any feelings, it better be anger because that's the only one that's acceptable. We ended up settling in Pickle Lake, Ontario, which is a tiny little mining town of about 400 people. And if any of you guys know Pickle Lake, it's like there's not much to do there. So by the time I hit 12 years old, it was like I started dabbling in drugs and alcohol and sex and whatever else I could do to occupy my time. What I come to realize as I got older and I started my own journey of recovery was that all those behaviors, the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, it was all trying to fill this hole that I felt inside my chest. Because I grew up feeling like there was something missing from me. Not necessarily that something was broken inside of me, but that something was fundamentally missing when I was made. And all those behaviors were an attempt to make me feel whole again. And sometimes they would work. They would work for a little bit. But most oftentimes that feeling didn't last very long. And I was left with the consequences of my behaviors afterwards, which just added to that hole getting bigger and bigger. By the time I was 13, I had to move away from home to attend high school, and I ended up in Red Lake, Ontario again with family, and very little adult supervision, and so I was able to really use the way that I wanted to use. And I had ready access to drugs, and that's what I did. You know, up until that point, I had been a really good student. I had been smart. There was high expectations on what I was going to be when I grew up, and that kind of all went out the window, and I just totally dove into drugs and alcohol because it helped me to get away from me, because that was my ultimate goal. I wanted to be as far away from me as was humanly possible because I didn't like the way that I felt. I didn't like living in my own skin. It was like physically uncomfortable to be inside myself. And so that was what drugs and alcohol did, was it helped me to not be me. And I just used to live, and I lived to use. And that hole that I had inside my chest just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I started getting really, really depressed because there was nothing that I could do that could fill it and that could make me feel whole. At 17, I ended up in Winnipeg at yet another high school because, of course, my behavior was that nobody wanted me around. When I got to Winnipeg, I had a really hard time at school making friends and fitting in, and I didn't have ready access to the drugs and alcohol that I normally did. And so I ended up in this deep depression, and I came up with this plan about how I was going to make the pain go away for good. And I decided that I was going to hang myself. And I was literally standing on the chair getting ready to put the noose over my head, and there was a knock at the door, and turned out that it was the mailman, and he had this parcel for me. And I opened up the parcel, and it was from my best friend back home, and it was this t-shirt. I don't know if you guys know South Park, but it was Cartman from the episode when he was a Vietnamese prostitute saying $10. And it had a little note in there, and she said, "I love you and I miss you, and I just wanted to make sure you were still alive." And I get goosebumps when I tell that story because it was like, it literally saved my life. I still have that t-shirt today. It gave me enough time to pause and really think about what I was doing in that moment and what it was that I was trying to achieve. It wasn't that I wanted to die, I just wanted the pain to go away, and I didn't know how to do that. And I got on the phone and I talked to my parents and I let them know what was going on with me, and my dad suggested that maybe treatment would be an option for me, that they could help me out there. And so I ended up in the Sister Margaret Smith Center in Thunder Bay in the youth program. And that was my first introduction to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous for my own self. And what I got out of that treatment was that there was more to Liana than just this shell that you see. there was stuff on the inside that I hadn't even looked at before or acknowledged before. And it was the beginning of my journey of starting to learn who I was. You know, up until that point, a lot of my life was focused on taking care of people, taking care of my mom, being there for my friends. Everything that I did was for everybody else and nothing was ever for myself. And my introduction to recovery was really an introduction to me. My mistake that time was that I got really involved with the fellowship of AA and NA, but I didn't do the work. I didn't do the steps. I didn't start practicing those principles that they teach you there in my life. And when I was 10 months sober, I had a flashback to sexual abuse I'd experienced as a kid, stuff that I had never dealt with. And I became overwhelmed with all that emotion, all that shame, all that pain from back then. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And so my option B, which always was suicide, the one thing that promises to take the pain away forever, popped back up again. And I ended up taking an overdose on pills and ended up in the psych ward for a couple weeks. My using got heavier, my consequences from my using got worse. My life went down real quick. And I decided that one of the guys I had been dating in recovery was coming up on a year sober and I wanted to get back together with him, so this is a good opportunity for me to go back to treatment. And I ended up in an all-women's treatment center in Sudbury. And I decided that, okay, the mistake that I made was I didn't do the steps, so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go through the 12 steps and get myself all fixed up and life is going to be rosy. And I hopped in to the steps right away and I sailed through steps 1, 2, and 3 and then started working on step 4, which talks about a fearless moral inventory. You know, and it's about digging up all that garbage from when I was using and the consequences from my use and the people that I hurt and the people that I was angry at and all that junk that I carried around with me because of that. And I did okay. I was sailing through it. It was like my fears inventory, my resentment inventory. I did great. And then I flipped the page and it said sexual inventory and I went, oh, nope, not going there. And I closed the book and I left treatment because I still had so much shame tied to that part of my life that I wasn't ready to look at that. And I went back to drinking within about a month. I stayed sober about a month, but eventually went back to drinking. And you know, they told me when I was in recovery that when you go back out, it gets worse. And I thought, well, fuck, what's worse than, you know, me trying to kill myself, me trying to make the pain go away forever. I was drinking and driving, and I almost put my passenger through the windshield. And even though I had no value in my own life, I knew that if I was to kill somebody else, that would be something that I wouldn't be able to live with. So I went back to treatment because that was the only thing I knew to do. And this time I ended up in a treatment center in Elliott Lake, Ontario called the Camilla Center. And I was 19 years old. And I was desperate to be happy. And I didn't know how to do that. And in that treatment, I started to understand and recognize how I had contributed to all the negative consequences that I experienced in my life. I started to understand that these were all results of choices that I had made. For a long time I felt a victim of my circumstances, but the reality was I placed myself in those situations. And so I started to really focus on following the directions that they were giving me. I got a sponsor. I started hanging around with women in recovery because that was something that I never did before. I always stuck with the guys, considered myself a tomboy, didn't like women. I thought all they do was whine and nag and talk about their kids. And what I came to realize was the reason why I didn't like women was because I couldn't manipulate them as well as I could men. I couldn't get what I wanted from them as easily as I could from men. And once I understood and accepted that about myself, it allowed me to have some of the most amazing friendships and relationships that I'd ever experienced in my life with women. Without a doubt, the first year of recovery is definitely the most difficult. You know, it's like here I am forced to sit inside my own head and I have nothing to drown out the thoughts and I've got nothing to numb the pain and I just got to sit and I got to deal with that. And that's always been the most overwhelming part of recovery for me, is learning how to deal with my emotions. I didn't get all better overnight. I started losing focus. On my recovery. I started losing focus on those relationships that I had, and became very self-centered and a victim of my circumstances yet again. And a month before my 8-year sobriety date, I decided to pick up a drink. Not because I wanted to get drunk, but because I didn't want to fight with recovery anymore. I was at a stage in my life that everything in my life was a fight. And I just wanted one less thing to have to fight with. So that started another 6 years of heavy use. And again, the consequences got worse. In June of 2015, one of my brothers died. And we all went back to Montreal to put him to rest. And my 2 older siblings have long-term recovery. One's got 30 years, one's got 18 years. And I vowed to myself that I was never coming back to the tables of AA or NA, because they couldn't teach me anything that they hadn't already showed me, so there was nothing for me there. And somehow, some way, I ended up at a meeting. My marriage and my life all centered around the use of drugs and alcohol. That was the whole basis of my relationship. He was my drinking buddy. And if I made a decision to get sober, that was going to change everything in my life. I had this scroll going in my head about whether or not I was really going to do this. And when I opened my mouth and I said, "Hi, my name's Liana and I'm an alcoholic," all of that stuff just went, and it was like I could breathe again for the first time in 6 years. Because what AA and NA does for me is it fills that hole that I have in my chest. That drugs doesn't, that men don't, that sex doesn't, that gambling doesn't. All those behaviors that I use to try and fill that gaping hole in my chest, none of that stuff works. But the things that I find in AA and NA, that's what helps fill that hole. And I was right in predicting that making that decision to get sober was going to end my marriage, because it did. My husband had no interest in being sober. And a year ago he came home and he told me that he has no interest in this sober life, and that we were done. And I was again left in a position where I had this really deep, overwhelming pain that I couldn't escape. And I'm here today to be able to talk about it, because that's what another person did for me. They sat and they shared their pain and their struggle and how they overcame it. And it was freely given to me, and I'm so grateful for that. And so that's why I come and I talk to you guys today.
Is it gonna hurt? Of course it will.
Gotta get that sleeve all the way up.
Yeah.
Show us some skin.
Yeah.
There it comes.
Yeah. I got these plugged into me. I had surgery done, and it affected my liver after it took my gallbladder out.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I'm going for surgery for my liver now.
So don't pay attention to what he's doing.
Yeah.
So you want to hear that song?
Oh no, I just heard it.
Tell us all about it.
Alright, we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and it's already in.
Is it that bad?
Yes.
It's not.
Done?
It's all done. See, you didn't even know I did it.
No, I gotta wait for a 9 o'clock meal now.
You should have just brought it with you.
That.
Yeah, it's 2 shots at once. I forgot to tell him to poke me.
Yes.
Or pinch me.
I gain so much when personal people share. I can read, I love reading, but yet somehow hearing the words, watching the people share. Like when I was listening to Liana, I can identify with her anger. I could identify with her, what are these guys talking about, you know, like, as if this is gonna work for me. They don't know me, you know, that internal dialogue we have, and that's the stuff that I gravitate to. I can watch people's body language, if they're relaxed, if they're listening, or if they're zoning out, or texting, or whatever. You know, that's how I learn. And then I discovered roundaboutly that I was susceptible to alcoholism. I had my first taste of alcohol on the First Nation community that I'm from at about 9 years old. And at 9-year-old, I was going around picking up empty beer bottles in the side of the road, the side of the ditch. And I was walking maybe about 3 or 4 miles from the community. I'd see them in the snow, Pilsner, Bow, or Calgary, or whatever these things were. And then there was one floating in the water. The cap was on. So somehow I said, there's 2 cents. I have like 12 already, another 2 cents will give me whatever. So I fished it out of there with a stick, and I got that bottle. It came floating to the water's edge. What the heck, it's full. I had a taste, and it was the most god-awful taste you could ever taste. Oh man, because it was sitting and the sun was shining on it. It got sunburned. So it was, oh God. I just poured it out. But yet that fizz, or that, you know, and I wish to this day that I never ever went on to actually take alcohol in my system, and to knew that I was probably born an alcoholic, that it gave me maybe a bit of a, maybe I was allergic to it because it did something to me. And before you know it, at 12, 14 years old, I was in the town of Broadview, which is like Red Lake or near close there. I was chipping in 25 cents with 3 other people to get a bottle of wine. The bottle of wine was 75 cents for a quart. It was Old Port or Brandvin or whatever. And we all took turns, 3 of us, or maybe there's 4 of us, having a swig. And I remember that swig that I had, it sort of went right down to my toes, back up to my body, and all of a sudden my nose just felt hot. I really remember that. I go, gee, what a weird feeling. I didn't know that. Was that how you got a wino nose or whatever? But that's the effect it had on me, physically. And then I would be able to talk. I phoned, I remember there's a telephone there. I phoned over to the cafe. Hey, is Linda there? I could talk to a girl. If I was sober, I couldn't do it. Oh, how are you doing? Yeah. Oh, I know who you are. Yeah, so what are you doing like next week? You want to go to a movie? And, okay. And to this day, you know, 20-some years later, I got a punch in the arm. Boom. And I didn't know what it was for. You stood me up. You said you wanted to meet me at a movie and you didn't show up. And there's like, I didn't remember. I probably was drinking that little bit of wine and just forgetting about it, and said, I was just so happy that I could speak to somebody. It gave me a voice, it gave me this confidence, and man, I deserved more than a slug, I guess, or whatever. And but the impact it had on me, to make a long story short, I love traveling, I love going places, and I love coming to this community here to hear the core of people that can actually help the people that are here, that learn to love the people, learn to love the North, learn to love the land, learn to love the water. It's incredible hearing your stories. I thank you all for that. The people that have come here as visitors, as artists, and live here as nurses and community members. Peter that's worked here, and Butch, that, you know, all the people that come to visit. My partner Josie. I thank all of you guys tonight because you warmed my heart. As I shared last night at the health clinic, I'm grieving right now. I'm grieving as a band member from the Ochapois First Nation. There's been 4 deaths in our community in the last 6 months or 4 months. All were related indirectly to alcoholism and the other substances that come with it. I find that alcohol, it seems to lead you to other things, like abuse of other drugs. I can't even say what they are in the community, but I know our First Nation is so susceptible to it. I went to a graduation one time about maybe 15 years ago, and I was astounded by the amount of alcoholism that the young people are facing. I was totally blown away. I went there to get the keys from my son because I didn't want him hurting himself or other people. And the amount of drinking that was going on in the community, they've changed it now. The band council outlawed those kind of parties that went on, like they'd have a dance party, DJ party, and they've had to, you know, write a band council resolution, no more of those parties going on. Because eventually somebody got ran over, there was fights that broke out, there was, you know, physical confrontations that going out, and gossip and belligerency, everything that goes kind of indirectly with alcoholism. And I'm glad that the Chief and Council and the Health Committee and the community got together and said, look, we got to try and stop something like this. And I'm glad that your community also is doing that. I really encourage you to, you know, to follow maybe some of Liana's suggestions. Let it start in the community. We can't initiate it as a band council or it'll go for a while, but if it starts in the community of some other, you know, maybe that the guys that were on the church, the guy that spoke right here, he's a minister, but he's had an association with alcoholism. Maybe the nurse, I see a nurse as a really contributing member that just once a week they have a building like this, somebody makes coffee and it's only an hour long and it's done. But we never know who's going to come through those doors and start getting it, reading the book, reaching out to other people that are afflicted with alcoholism. How do you stay away from it? The attraction. I'm attracted to this program because of Liana and other people that I see success in this program, that they followed some simple steps and learned to pick themselves up. And when I listen to them, I can imagine if this program wasn't in their life, where the heck would they be? Where would your children be? You know, what the relationships with your family, where would that be? It'd be probably chaos. It probably wouldn't be truth, it wouldn't be honesty, it wouldn't be from the heart, it wouldn't be out of love, it wouldn't be out of care. And I really am glad to be part of this tonight, to encourage the community to, yes, there is resource people here, and take the program at its word. It's got to start from within the community, from maybe another alcoholic or a nurse or whatever, and then you're going to see it grow. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here this week, and I'm looking forward to sharing my little bit of sobriety with my buddy Errol Ranville, who is also Seaweed. We know each other, and I went to a few of his AA meetings at Pritchard House in the core area in Winnipeg. And Pritchard's House is in the area where the poorest people probably in all of North America live. You know, there's gangs there. It predominantly used to be immigrants that came there and lived and grew up, and then they left once they got rich enough to move away. So it's now poverty-stricken. So, you know, they're susceptible to a lot of gang activity and everything that goes with it, other drugs.